What does Howth have to do with the flight of the Earls? Most people would say very little, yet there is a strong connection. The actions of one of the St. Lawrences, Barons of Howth at the time, can be said to have strongly contributed to Hugh O'Neill's decision to flee Ireland in September 1607. Sir Christopher St. Lawrence, 8th Baron Howth, played a fundamental role in one of the turning points in Irish history. Yet, this is something that has gone mostly unremembered. Indeed, there does not seem to be a mention of it in the various histories of Howth Castle, seat of the St. Lawrences. It's often strange what gets remembered in popular versions of history. In Ireland, there are many stories of betrayals and informers, whether in the War of Independence, various 19th century struggles, 1798, 1641, or earlier. Indeed, one of the best-known stories to do with the 9 Years' War is the false one that Brian Og MacMahon betrayed Hugh O'Neill's plan to the English for a bottle of whiskey. Also lacking evidence is the story that Hugh O'Donnell was poisoned in Spain in 1602. Yet, there is a story of betrayal and informers from this time which had a huge impact on Irish history. One that actually altered the path of Irish history. However, it is virtually unknown apart from academic specialists. This video is about Sir Christopher St. Lawrence, 8th Baron Howth, and his involvement in and betrayal of a conspiracy among Irish Catholic lords which led to Hugh O'Neill, Rory O'Donnell and others fleeing Ireland, what has become known as the Flight of the Earls. It's probable that without St. Lawrence's actions, neither the Flight of the Earls nor the subsequent plantation of Ulster would have occurred. St. Lawrence's actions can thus be said to have utterly transformed Ireland. Initially, St. Lawrence seems to be an unlikely conspirator against the English government. He'd fought in the English army throughout the 9 Years' War, helping in the killing of Fiach Mac Hugh O'Byrne. In June 1596, he was knighted by Elizabeth I. He became close to the Earl of Essex during the latter's disastrous time in Ireland, being made a colonel by him. In fact, he accompanied Essex on his mad return to England. At the time, he was reported to have pledged to kill Essex's arch-enemy, the all-powerful Cecil. Brought before the Privy Council a few months later, he denied this and was let off. During this hearing, he is reported as stating the following, quote, "I am sorry that when I am in England, I should be esteemed an Irishman, and in Ireland an Englishman. I have spent my blood, engaged and endangered my life, often to do Her Majesty service, and do beseech to have it so regarded." End quote. Back in Ireland, he continued to fight in the English army under Lord Deputy Mountjoy. He was injured at the Moray Pass and fought in a notable skirmish with Richard Tyrrell. He also fought during the Kinsale campaign, but not the battle itself. However, during the latter part of the war, particularly after the execution of Essex, he began to argue with other officials. This led to him being dismissed as Governor of Monaghan towards the end of the war and from being excluded from patronage afterwards. This meant he probably believed that he did not receive his share of the spoils from the war. Having no patronage, his debts began to build up in the post-war period. So did his discontent. Although St. Lawrence had become a Protestant some time earlier, he tended to identify with the Catholic opposition to James. Before moving on with the story, it is useful to jump backwards and talk about the 9 Years' War for a bit. Once again, to the contrary of the perceived view, English victory was not inevitable in this war, even after the arrival of Mountjoy. Hugh O'Neill could have won it. Indeed, he came very close to doing so. In late December 1602, Mountjoy's forces were caught between the Spaniards in Kinsale and O'Neill's forces outside it. The weather was bad and all sides were suffering. Mountjoy's men were in the worst position, as they were cut off from supply by land and caught between the Spaniards and the Gaelic Irish. Bad weather, disease, and desertion all played havoc with Mountjoy's forces. Large numbers of his men died, especially the newly arrived soldiers. All O'Neill and the Spaniards had to do was to wait for the English army to fall apart. This was what O'Neill and O'Donnell wanted to do, as it made sense. Unfortunately, the Spanish commander, Don Juan de l'Aquila, misunderstood the nature of Irish warfare and seemed more concerned about leaving Ireland than winning the war. In a plan described by Hiram Morgan as making no sense from the Gaelic point of view, de l'Aquila insisted that O'Neill's forces take offensive action. They were supposed to move to a hill above Kinsale where de l'Aquila said he would meet them. O'Neill's forces got there. De l'Aquila did not. He stayed in Kinsale. Worse, thanks to de l'Aquila's plan, the Gaelic forces were now open to attack from the English cavalry, something the English had unsuccessfully been trying to achieve for years. Obviously, the English took full advantage of de l'Aquila's stupidity and won the war. Despite the fiasco of the Battle of Kinsale, O'Neill was still able to win a negotiated peace. Unlike others who fought the Queen, such as the Earl of Desmond, he would not be hunted down and killed. Rather, he forced the English to eventually grant him terms, what has become known as the Treaty of Mellifont. As is well known, this was signed after the death of Elizabeth. The new King of England, James, inherited a pacified Ireland, fully under English control for the first time. However, most of the elites in the country remained Catholic, whether they were Gaelic, Old English, or some New English. James had the chance to build a new political structure in Ireland, one which could have tried to incorporate these various elites. James failed desperately here. Unsure of his position in England, he let his Irish policy be dictated by a small group of English officials, something which would ultimately cost his family dearly and push Ireland along a very violent path. Hugh O'Neill would be central to the new Ireland that would be built. Despite his defeat in the war, he was still one of the most powerful lords in Ireland, controlling a large part of Ulster. He was also the leading Gaelic lord in the country. More than this, he was a talented political leader who could have helped James run Ireland. The new king had a choice: incorporate O'Neill in his Irish administration, like he had done with Argyll in Scotland, or let his agents undermine O'Neill, building a more colonial administration excluding most Irish elites. The latter happened. Initially, Mountjoy protected O'Neill, but he was forced aside after a couple of years. His replacement as Lord Deputy was Arthur Chichester. He was not a pleasant character, and had been one of the intellectual architects of the savagery of English policy in the 9 Years' War. Chichester and Sir John Davis, the Solicitor General, rapidly began to move against O'Neill, using whatever means they could to undermine him and reduce his power. They also initiated a persecution of Catholics. All of this left Ireland unstable. O'Neill had to walk a tightrope to protect himself, especially since England and Spain were now at peace. O'Neill received some money from Spain, but this was tiny compared to the pensions the Spaniards were paying to several members of the Privy Council. The vast majority of Ireland was Catholic. Chichester brought in anti-Catholic measures, unsettling the Old English. As their name shows, these believed themselves to be English, despite being born in Ireland. However, the majority had remained Catholic and were regarded with suspicion by the English government. A suspicion that was largely unfounded, since many of them had fought and died or been injured in the English army in the 9 Years' War. At the same time, large numbers of Gaelic Irish, and indeed some Old English, were now serving in Spanish armies in the Low Countries. It suited James and others that a large number of Gaelic soldiers served on the battlefields that were far from Ireland. However, as might be expected, these Irish soldiers soon became the focus of rumours and possible conspiracies. Disaffected lords wanted to convince the Spanish to send the Irish tercio to Ireland to support an uprising. It's now time to turn back to St. Lawrence. Despite being Protestant and having fought for the English in the war, he identified with the Old English and with discontent. He became close to some of those who were planning to rebel, or at least were talking about this. Throughout this period, his actions were often contradictory. At the same time that he was involved in planning a rebellion, he was also asking for a pension from the English crown and that he be allowed to serve in the Spanish army in the Low Countries. He also recruited men for the Spanish army in Cavan, Monaghan and Fermanagh. When he reached Brussels, he seems to have become even more heavily involved in plans to convince the Spanish to send soldiers in Ireland. Then things began to unravel. In February 1607, his relative and former ensign, George St. Lawrence, told the authorities of plans to rebel, implicating Art Rory MacMahon. In turn, the latter implicated St. Lawrence and others. It's possible that George St. Lawrence went to the authorities on the instructions of Christopher St. Lawrence, his former commander. This is a possibility raised by Terry Clavin in his article on St. Lawrence for the Dictionary of Irish Biography. In early 1607, St. Lawrence shuttled between Ireland, England and Flanders. In May 1607 his father died and he became Baron Howth. Although St. Lawrence was regarded by many as unreliable, he had managed to become close to many in O'Neill's circle, including his son Henry, who was serving in the tercios in the Low Countries. Around this time, St. Lawrence spoke to government officials on more than one occasion, warning them about a conspiracy of a Catholic revolt. However, he wanted to cover up his role in the conspiracy and hide the fact that he was acting as an informer. To make matters worse, he also acted as a kind of double agent, telling O'Neill that the king was suspicious of him and, quote, putting buzzes in the head of the Earl of Tyrone, end quote. Things now get even more confusing. Part of this is due to politics and part to the erratic behaviour of St. Lawrence. He sought to keep his role in the affair silent, since he wanted to keep the esteem of his fellow Irish elites. At the same time, he wanted to be rewarded by the government for the information he was providing. Richard Nugent, Baron Delvin, was implicated in the plot and arrested, though it seems he was drawn into the conspiracy by St. Lawrence himself. St. Lawrence also named important Catholic nobles as being part of the conspiracy, including Rory O'Donnell and Hugh O'Neill. However, his information against O'Neill was based on hearsay. In a political world that was often fed by rumour and in which information was weaponized, St. Lawrence's accusations had a dramatic impact on the Irish political situation. Indeed, they can be seen as triggering the flight of the Earls. Despite the attempts of the Dublin administration to keep the accusations secret, knowledge of them spread rapidly. How accurate these rumours were is another question. James seems to have been made aware of them, which perhaps explains the dramatic change in the way he treated O'Neill. O'Neill was summoned to London to resolve his differences with Donald Balloch O'Cahan in a dispute which Chichester and Davis had concocted. Davis was also summoned. Ominously, he was to guide James's judgment. Moreover, the tone of James's letter seemed to indicate that O'Neill would lose in the conflict with O'Cahan, also hinting at worse punishments for O'Neill. The sharp change in James's attitude seems to have shaken O'Neill. This was worsened by warnings from various sources, possibly from Garrett Moore and also possibly from Archduke Albert in Brussels, who may have been tipped off by the Earl of Northampton. These warnings told O'Neill that he would be arrested in England. All of these rumours and warnings resulted in a very volatile situation. Chichester had made matters worse by having O'Neill's nephew, Brian MacArt, arrested and charged with manslaughter. The latter was the elder brother of Owen Rue O'Neill and had been one of O'Neill's best commanders in the war, holding his own in East Ulster almost until the end. He fought against Chichester, who made many false claims of having defeated him. O'Neill tried to have his nephew released, even offering Chichester a large bribe. The latter refused. Brian MacArt was sentenced to death. His crime was being O'Neill's nephew and having fought too well against Chichester. He would be executed after the flight of the Earls. Meanwhile, Rory O'Donnell and Cuchonach Maguire, who were much more directly implicated by St. Lawrence's accusations than O'Neill himself, decided to flee to Spain. Things now speed up. Under intense pressure, facing hostility from Dublin and now from London, receiving warnings that he would be imprisoned in London, O'Neill decided to seek aid in Spain. A tactical retreat, according to Micheline Kearney-Walsh. Cuchonach Maguire managed to lease a French ship and brought it to Ireland. Despite intense scrutiny from the government, O'Neill and O'Donnell outwitted them. With around 100 followers, they both went to Rathmunnel in Tyrconnell. Here, Cuchonach Maguire was waiting with the ship. O'Neill and O'Donnell thus fled Ireland. It would become known as the Flight of the Earls. Their intention was to go to Spain and from there return to Ireland, hopefully with an army. They came close to Spain, but the weather blew them to France. Not for the first or last time bad weather would affect the future of Ireland and England. Landing in France, they were shuttled to the Spanish Netherlands. Afterwards, they were sent to Rome. As the brilliant work of Micheline Kearney-Walsh has shown, O'Neill was too important to be ignored, but too dangerous to be used or let loose. He would be left to rot in Rome. Rory O'Donnell and many of the other exiles would die quickly in Italy. O'Neill, older than most, would live until 1616, continually pleading to be allowed to return to Ireland. How responsible was Christopher St. Lawrence for the flight of the Earls? On the one hand, he had helped create plans for a rising in Ireland. He then betrayed this conspiracy, saying that he had evidence against Rory O'Donnell and Hugh O'Neill. However, he refused to testify publicly and also tried to keep in with both sides, making a complicated picture even more tempestuous. Chichester and others were already doing their best to cause O'Neill's downfall. St. Lawrence added to his betrayal of his fellow conspirators by his double dealings on both sides, making an unstable situation even worse. On the other hand, O'Neill was a skilled politician and well able to charm people. It's probable that he could have survived the encounter with James in London, even if the lad had been hostile to him. O'Neill was still the natural leader of Gaelic Ulster. His potential arrest in London would have caused great unease in Ireland. Would James have been able to cope with this? In his book on the flight, John McCavitt argues that James would have balked at imprisoning O'Neill. It's hard to disagree with him. Ultimately, though, O'Neill snapped and decided to seek help in Spain. Fortunately for James, he never made it there. St. Lawrence's actions can thus be said to have definitely contributed to the flight of the Earls, by making a volatile situation even more dangerous, and pushing O'Neill into taking the worst decision possible. St. Lawrence did not really benefit from becoming an informer. Indeed, his role in the betrayal was kept silent for a while. However, he continued to play both sides, trying to help Rory O'Donnell's wife flee Ireland. He annoyed Chichester by refusing to testify publicly. People began to suspect him, including Lord Delvin, who escaped from Dublin Castle and blamed St. Lawrence for betraying him. St. Lawrence managed to fight with people from all sides and outed himself as the informer who had triggered the flight of the Earls. Despite all these conflicts and being arrested on various times, St. Lawrence was never published. He has also been treated relatively easy by the historiography. It's worth finishing here by talking a little about the nature of historical or collective memory. The false accusations against Brian Og McMahon of betraying the Confederate plan to the attack on Kinsale are well known. Despite being false, they are arguably part of historical or collective memory, similar to the Pass of the Plumes and other misconstrued perspectives of the war. Despite the evident falsity of the story about McMahon, it is easy to find accounts vilifying him. Yet, the real betrayal by Christopher St. Lawrence and its massive, long-term consequences is forgotten or ignored. While the actions of the latter were one of the triggers for the disaster of the flight of Earls, this is nowhere in historical memory. Rather, the St. Lawrence family is best known in this period for the dubious story of Granuaile O'Malley kidnapping a St. Lawrence child. Collective or historical memory is complicated. What gets remembered hundreds of years afterwards is not always what was most important. Nor does it mean that these things remembered actually happened. Moreover, other events get in the way too. What gets remembered is often what was important at particular times long after the events themselves. This helps mold interpretations and even changes how particular events are seen. Romanticism and nationalism in the late 18th and 19th centuries had a huge impact on the perception of events in the early modern period. Other events and changes in historiography also affect this perception. In short, historical or collective memory is not a very reliable indicator. Heroes and villains can be forged much after the facts, based on opinion rather than evidence, while real heroes and real villains are far too often ignored. Thanks for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you can support it, please buy me a coffee at the link in the notes. Gurav Mahagud Agriv Slán.